Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Carey Heller. Today, we have Marina Kerlow here, who's a local mental health professional. I'm very excited to have on the show. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, it's great to be here. I'm a licensed graduate marriage and family therapist in Maryland. I'm the founder of my private practice, Marina Kerlow Therapy, and I work with children, teens, young adults, individuals, and families across a wide range of issues. And I have a research background in working with families and parenting practices and supporting children with their social emotional development, as well as Latino adolescent sexual health. And I specialize in trauma, neurodiversity, parenting anxious children, emotion regulation, and diverse family structures, as well as multicultural and immigration related issues. And I'm really happy to be here today.
All right, great. Well, we're definitely happy to have you. So our topic today is kids and big emotions. So essentially helping kids to better regulate or manage their emotional responses. So I imagine it sounds like that's something you probably work with quite a bit.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I think this is such an important topic for parents and mental health clinicians. And I think it's important to understand, why does this matter? Why does it matter helping children with big emotions? So it matters because it creates emotionally regulated adults who can communicate what they're feeling and what they need in a healthy way, and can also seek out support when they need it. And it really strengthens that parent-child emotional bond and attunement. So it's really important in terms of supporting kids in being pro-social and empathetic and in tune with their emotions. So definitely important topic for me.
I agree. And I think you make a really good point that it's not just about helping kids in the moment now to navigate it, but it's also how does it impact them as an adult if they don't manage it now?
Yes, absolutely, right? Because we could see, struggling with anger issues or dysregulation or suppressing emotions because you didn't have that safe environment at home where you were able to learn what was going on in your body and communicate that and have a parent with you to support you through those emotions. So a lot of my work is through an attachment framework as well as nervous system regulation. So that's really how I view supporting children with big emotions.
All right, good. And so, like, let's say, it's your first session, you're working with someone, or the parents out there listening that want to figure out how do I get started in helping my kids to better regulate their emotions. So, where do you think a good starting point often would be?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, where to start? I definitely think it's important to start with helping children recognize what is going on in their bodies, right? Responding to those hunger cues, feeling thirsty, feeling a fast heart rate. What is going on? Helping them start by doing that introspective reflections and labeling their emotions. So, I could imagine you're feeling angry right now. Is that what you're feeling right now? And even helping them identify those emotions in other people. So this could look like reading books together. When you're reading children's books, you could pause and ask them, what do you think that character's feeling right now? I wonder if they're feeling sad. How do you know that they're feeling sad? So helping them think through and start to identify and label emotions so that when they feel those physiological responses during big emotions, they're able to know what is going on with me. And so helping them start to label and understand what's happening in their body. Because in the moment, when kids are dysregulated, their body is responding through stress, right? They can't think logically. So being able to help them understand what's going on in their body. This can also be done through play and art. And I really like exploring different methods with families to see what resonates with them and how they engage in talking about emotions with their kids.
Great. Well, I think you definitely shared some really good, very concrete strategies for people to get started. I think it's great. I guess
Mm.
one question I had is, so you mentioned the idea of labeling emotions to start.
Yes.
Do you feel like there are times where it's better to have kids kind of ask them to see if they can come up with the emotion themselves first, or do you feel like it's better to kind of give them choices to begin with and then gradually get them to acknowledge it without it giving options? What do you think about that piece? Because that was something that stood out to me from what you mentioned that I imagine may vary to some degree based on the particular child.
Yes, absolutely. And the age range. So I think it's really important there for it to be developmentally appropriate and relevant to your child. So I would say they need that education and support and help recognizing their emotions. So I would say this could take different forms, right? Kids might not, you know, gravitate towards doing everything verbally. It could look like drawing how they're feeling that day. It could look like encouraging them to draw how they feel and helping them try to label that, but checking in with them and collaborating with them. Are you feeling angry, or what color are you feeling today? Let's draw it and talk through it. So I think they do need that support and information and education, to create that scaffolding as they get older and are able to better label their emotions and understand what's going on with them. So I do think they need that compassion from parents and support and education there to know how to label their emotions. And it could look like, having printing out emotion emojis or faces and putting that on your fridge, and your child being able to look over to that and try to figure out how they're feeling with your support.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. And I think the idea that, we mentioned about the visual piece, I think for some kids can be extremely helpful. And I think having it in an easy place, and certainly they make posters you can buy online, or print out online and hang up somewhere. But I think having it, or even sometimes if you're out, having a portable version you can sort of show your child if needed, especially for younger kids, can definitely help. And I think one of the things to also look at here that I think you kind of alluded to is the idea of helping a child in the moment when they're having when they're upset, versus kind of proactively helping to kind of avoid sort of strong sort of meltdowns. But also recognizing in the moment that, some kids are, going to sort of, you can sort of see how upset they are. Others, I mean, you can still see, but maybe more they sort of hold it in and sort of kind of shut down, as opposed to being very verbal about how upset they are.
Yes, absolutely. That's a really great point, that there's such a range of ways children express or respond to emotions. And so that's where we really need that co regulation piece, where parents are able to continue to be calm and grounded with their children and validate them and help them with emotional coaching. So, through the research that I've done, we've seen that there's a variety of responses that parents can have to children's emotions, right? There's ignoring, there's non supportive responses, such as, don't cry, be strong, we got to move on. There's distraction responses, right? Where parents are like, no, 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 don't cry, play with this bear. Do you want candy? Come on, let's go do something else to make you feel better. And then there's the emotion coaching and the co regulation, where they're able to really validate their child's emotions and be with them through those emotions and kind of ride that wave out with them. And so, what does co regulation look like? What are the do's and don'ts of emotional coaching? That can be really challenging to parse through that and figure out, what does that exactly look like? But it can look like saying validating comments that feel authentic to you as a parent, right? Like, I hear you, and this sounds really hard right now. It's okay to cry, and I'm here with you right now. Simple things like that can feel really good to children in those moments, right? Where they're really feeling big emotions, and they don't feel so alone in those emotions.
Yeah, I think to add to that, one thing I found helpful sometimes is, again, it depends on the child and situation, but sometimes acknowledging that, you would probably feel the same way they do if you were in that same situation. Because sometimes that in itself can be very validating to kids.
Yes, absolutely. It really helps to normalize what they're experiencing. That it's normal. You might have felt that way as a child, and you can understand where they're coming from. And it helps them feel like, okay, it's safe for me to express my emotions. My parents get it, and they're here with me. And I can trust them, because I think parents, from an attachment perspective, children, when they're infants, starting as infants, they're looking to their parents, for their parents' responses and reactions, and to figure out what is safe and unsafe in the world. And so, they want to know, when I lose control of my emotions, will you be there with me? Is it safe for me?
Yeah. And I guess for the kids that tend to shut down more, because I imagine that if a child is very upset, in some ways it gives you more, or parent more data to work with in the moment.
Right.
Whereas when a child is just sort of silent, and you can see they're upset, but they won't say anything. Like,
Right.
what do you have any ideas for an in the moment strategy to navigate that part of it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what it comes down to is really figuring out how to help children develop coping skills and ways to bring themselves back to their center where they are calm and regulated. So on both sides of the spectrum, right? It's important to eventually help them figure out how to bring them back to the center. So a child that, might be shutting down or suppressing their emotions, how can parents or caregivers or other therapists help bring them back, right? So that might look like, offering a hug, or if they don't like hugs, offering to sit next to them and put your arm on their shoulder if they're okay with that. It might look like showing them different breathing exercises and asking, do you want to do some breathing together? And then maybe talk about how you're feeling. So giving them that time they need to regulate. Either way, right? If they're having a tantrum or they're really reactive with their emotions or they're shutting down, they need compassion from parents and empathy, emotional validation, and co-regulation, being calm with them, and then encouraging them to think through what would help them feel better. Is that doing breathing exercises together? Is that hugging their favorite stuffed animal or giving their parent a hug, helping them bring themselves back to the center, and they're able to then be able to communicate what might have been going on for them. Or even pointing to a poster, an emotions poster, and using nonverbals to show how they're feeling. That can also be helpful.
Great. No, I appreciate you sharing those strategies. Definitely sound like, really helpful ones, in the moment, especially for kids that tend to shut down and aren't as sort of as, vocal about what's going on. And I think one of the key things that I think we've been kind of going back and forth between is this idea of in the moment strategies versus more longer term. How do you help kids, whether they react very strongly or don't say anything, to in turn create sort of better emotion regulation sort of abilities, after that individual moment?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And making sure that, as we're building their emotional coping toolbox, making sure that the things that parents are teaching them or doing with them are age appropriate or fun for the kids. So you're not going to tell a child who's 5 years old, you should really do a guided meditation. That's going to help you feel better. That's not going to land well for them. So something I do with my clients is figuring out fun breathing techniques that work for kids. So one of the ones that I really like is stuffed animal breathing, where they put a stuffed animal on their stomach. Maybe a parent will hold the stuffed animal there if the child is open to that. And they practice deep belly breathing with the stuffed animal, moving the stuffed animal up and down. And they like looking at the stuffed animal, but this also really helps them regulate their nervous system and bring themselves back to that centered place. So it's fun, there's different breathing techniques, there's hand breathing, there's square breathing, and different things that they can practice, as well as visualizations or body scans. And parents are really crucial in that and doing it with them. And so it's not, oh, you should go off and do your breathing. It's more, what breathing skill do you want to do together that might make you feel better?
That'd be great. Yeah, no, I think that those definitely sound like great ideas. One of the things I was thinking of from what you said to sort of add to that is I mean, so I think certainly, especially the stuffed animal one sounds great. Another one I can think of, or one or two I can think of that I often use that are helpful to kind of add to that are for younger kids. There's a Sesame app where it's basically the monster breathing, and you kind of rub the monster's tummy, and they kind of breathe in and out, and you kind of breathe with them. It's like sort of interactive thing. Or also on the Headspace app, they have some nice visual ones. Like there's a cloud breathing where you kind of breathe in and out, the
Yes.
master clouds. And I feel like oftentimes for younger kids, I think it is easier to see the visual base. I think for some of them, if they just are hearing stuff, it's sometimes hard to imagine that. And I think that can be kind of discouraging. There's also, I mean, I think there's maybe a mindfulness for kids app or meditation for kids
Mhm.
app. There's, if you put it into the app store, there are a bunch out there that have nice visual ones. Like there's one, I think, with a spaceship launching and some other ones that are more calm. But I think, especially young kids, having that visual piece, I think is often extremely helpful. Even for
Yes,
some adults, it's helpful too to have. Also.
absolutely. Yes, absolutely. That's such a great point. I think visualization is so effective for some kids. And so I think that those are really wonderful resources that we have access to. And I also think it's important to understand the intersection between neurodiversity and helping kids with handling big emotions, because we see with neurodiversity, right, that sometimes there's more emotional intensity that comes with emotions. They may experience emotions more intensely. And so, I don't know, from your experience, what do you think are important considerations when parents are helping their neurodiverse children with big emotions?
Well, I mean, I think you bring up a really good point that a lot of it, first of all, is figuring it, because I often figure it out from what is the reason for the big emotions.
Right.
So, for example, if someone has ADHD and they have a hard time with shifting attention, and then when they have to shift attention quickly, that leads to them reacting strongly, then that's very different than someone that's so anxious about something that that's leading to them having the big emotions. So, I think it depends on the particular reason, and again, you can't always pinpoint specifically it's always due to this or that, but I think that can often be a good starting point.
Right.
I do think one thing that probably is helpful though is for us to, for those listeners that maybe aren't as familiar with some of the terms, can you define neurodiversity just so this bit everyone ensures that they know what it means?
Yeah, absolutely. Neurodiversity is an umbrella term for different types of, attention issues or learning issues. It includes autism spectrum, ADHD, dyslexia, learning disabilities, and I practice from a place of neurodiverse affirming therapy, and so that looks like really accepting and embracing children's neurodiversity and their behaviors and figuring out what are their unique needs and what are strategies they need to support those unique needs. So it's not about modifying their behavior or changing them to be neurotypical. Neurodiverse affirming therapy is really embracing their strengths and figuring out what supports do they need to be successful. So
Sure. Well, I appreciate it. That was a great explanation. So I think that's definitely helpful, and for all listeners out there in terms of ensuring they understand what that term means. And again, when it comes down to it, it's about obviously addressing what each individual person's unique needs are and how to help them to sort of to thrive in life. And
yes.
that it's not always saying, this is bad or this is wrong, but it's the idea of how do you help, build on their strengths and make things even better. Like, I do, when I think of working with kids a lot with executive function challenges, it's often, I mean, anyone can benefit from improving executive function skills, no matter how good you are at them, focusing on how could I make this better? How can I be more efficient with my time? How could I keep, let's say, my desk or my, playroom better organized, whatever the place is, by
Mhm.
constantly focusing on how could I make improvements, it helps people to be motivated towards continuing to sort of move forward in a positive way.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's a great point. I think, when you're responding to children who are neurodiverse and have unique needs or, more sensitivity to sensory stimuli, it's important to make those changes, those tweaks and improvements and collaborating with the child, and also trying to understand their world and helping normalize what they're feeling. So, for example, let's say you go to a birthday party and your child feels really overwhelmed to the noises and people and they get really emotionally dysregulated. I think it could be a moment where you can show emotional validation and understanding and also try to enter into their world and normalize what they're feeling. For example, saying, yeah, I know it's really hard going to birthday parties for you. I could imagine it's really overwhelming. I hear a lot of loud noise too. What's that like for you? What might you be experiencing? So trying to help normalize what they're feeling and enter into their world and be compassionate and attuned with them can be really helpful. And maybe support or comfort looks different to them. Maybe they don't want a hug that's too much sensory stimuli and they want to sit under their weighted blanket. Can you sit with them? Can you sit next to them while they're under their weighted blanket and see if they need anything else? So figuring out, like you're saying, those tweaks and those improvements and figuring out what feels comforting and supportive to them in those moments.
Very great. And I guess before we wrap up, is there any final thoughts you have on any takeaways you want to kind of convey to our listeners about how to help their kids with big emotions?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say as a family therapist, I am very systemic in my thinking, and I'm also a decolonizing therapist. And so I think it's very important to bring in family of origin and bigger systems that may impact parents' own discomfort with their children's big emotions. So something I do in my therapy space is asking parents about their different triggers. Like, what about your child feeling sad or your child being afraid? What about that is triggering to you? And what were emotions like in your home? How were emotions talked about? what emotions were safe for you to express, what emotions felt really unsafe for you to express, and what would you like to do differently than your family of origin in terms of how you respond to your child's emotions. So I think it's really important to bring in cultural aspects and what happened in your own family to figure out, why is this making me really uncomfortable? Why is this triggering to me? And once parents are able to understand their own triggers, they can also take a moment to regulate themselves. So that might look like them taking a couple of deep breaths before they respond, or seeing if another caregiver is available to support them and give them a little break. So I think that bringing family and culture into the space is really important.
Very good. Yeah, and I think you also bring up, just to highlight one of the other points you brought up that's really important, this idea of, as a parent, you have to take care of yourself first in a lot of ways. If you can't address your own triggers and things like that, it's sort of like the oxygen mask, on the airplane in terms of the safety guide. If you
Yes.
can't take care of yourself first, it makes you less effective to be able to take care of your child and help them.
Yes, absolutely. Self-care is a necessity. It is essential. And I think self-care, it goes so much deeper than breathing and bubble baths. It's really, taking steps and actions that really align with your values and how you want to be as a person in the world, and what do you need. And I think as a parent, sometimes your needs get pushed to the bottom, right? Like, I'm so focused on what does my child need, and then you don't realize you might be getting really depleted and need some moments of self-care for yourself. So I do think that it's important for parents to push that up on the priority list. And it might be, doing that in small doses, but just figuring out what feels authentic, what feels doable, and what works for them.
Right. And also being realistic that, if
Yes.
you need 2 hours a day to have free time and that's not feasible, to figure out what's the minimum amount of time you could have, even if it's 10 or 15 minutes, doing something you truly enjoy, can you weave that in? And
Yes.
then maybe have a block of time on the weekend or some other time where there is that time for you to then have a bigger slot of time to do more for yourself, but to figure out when within the realistic constraints of day-to-day life, finding amount of time that works and an activity that you find fulfilling can go a long way towards, helping you to take better care of yourself as a parent as well.
Yes, absolutely. I definitely agree with that. And I would definitely encourage parents to seek out support and find community, whether that looks like going on walks with friends who are also experiencing similar struggles, calling a friend, going to a parenting support group, or seeking out some of the services that I offer, such as parent coaching or emotional coaching for their children, family therapy or individual therapy, where they can continue to do that deeper work and continue learning and practicing those skills to be attuned with their child.
Yeah, and I think to add to that also, I mean, in addition to kind of working on this stuff directly, even just seeking out that sense of community indirectly. So the idea of having a sense of community of other parents to hang out with, even if you're not necessarily discussing, issues that are going on with your kids, the primary focus of that activity, just sometimes having that camaraderie can be helpful because when things come up, you have people there to talk to. But in general, just having the shared similarity of, our kids in the same, I don't know, sports team or school or grade or
Yes.
class, and that can sometimes just, even if you don't talk about something, this may help emotionally to feel good, to feel that sense of connection, even if you're not, often discussing those things are actually going on. But
Yes,
in general, it is good when there are issues to certainly discuss them. But my point is that in addition to that, having that sense of community in general can be really helpful.
absolutely. 100%. I agree with that. I think just finding your community, finding your people can be really empowering and help you feel less alone and overwhelmed with some of the issues you're dealing with, and finding that emotional support for yourself as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I guess if people want to reach out to you, where can they find you?
Absolutely. They are welcome to visit my website, marinakerlowtherapy.com, and they can reach out to me there. And I also have an Instagram page that they're welcome to follow. And that's probably the best way to reach me, is through my website.
All right, great. Well, thanks a lot for joining us today. Definitely happy to have you on. I appreciate you sharing all these great strategies and tips. And thanks everyone for listening today. And again, until next time, definitely tune in for the next episode. I'm not sure yet when that will be, but definitely stay tuned and follow us on Spotify and Apple Music or Apple Podcasts and whatever other ones this podcast is on. It's hard to keep track of them all. All right, take care, everyone.
Bye.